Now, whether what is my view about the emergence of incredible billionaires? That's a different story. Particularly when we think about the segment of society that is lagging behind. I think that these billionaires can be taxed heavily without affecting their incentives and allow those members of societies that are unable to accumulate properly to participate in the production process and to participate in society. So in this respect, I'm certainly receptive to the idea that one has to redistribute from incredibly rich individuals towards the bottom end of the distribution.
When we look at different countries, and I think there are indices for inequality that try to measure these, like the Gini coefficient, I think. Um, what are consequences? What comes together with very equal societies and with very unequal societies?
Right. So when we think about unequal societies, and as you said, typically we measure it with the Gini index. So there are sort of certain regions of the world that appear to be rather unequal. Some societies in Latin America, Brazil and Colombia in particular, and some societies in Africa, particularly in the southern part of Africa. Then in the comparison between the Americas and Europe, it appears that Europeans are more egalitarian than the Americans. Now, when we think about egalitarian societies in comparisons to more unequal societies, so if we make the comparison between the United States and Europe, and we see the sort of the welfare state, if you wish, on the one hand, and perhaps and the and we see the sort of a more competitive system in the U.S. The more competitive system in the US is generating more incentive, more prosperity, more resilience in times of economic crisis. And the more humane, if you wish, system that exists in Europe is permitting individuals to live more comfortably, perhaps less prosperous. I mean, on the average prosperity is lower than what is prevalent perhaps in the US, but again, they are compensated by certain safety nets that are part of society that are quite important. So it's really a matter of your value system, where you would like to be, and what type of society matches your value system. And there's some trade-offs that are associated with it. If you live in a purely capitalistic society, probably on average you will be more prosperous. But if you fail, you will pay for it more dearly. And if you live in a society that is more humane, more that provides greater safety nets, on average prosperity will be lower. But in case of failure, you will still be in a relatively reasonable position. So these are the trade-offs typically.
And now looking at the society as a whole, can we see if, for example, more unequal countries maybe have greater economic growth or the opposite?
I think that there is a debate about the relationship between inequality and economic growth. I don't think that there is a consensus in the economic profession about this relationship. I mean, traditionally, I mean, in the past, I mean, I would say 50, 100 years ago, there was a sense that perhaps inequality is very good for economic growth because inequality can contribute to the concentration of resources in the hands of very few. Those individuals will save more, will accumulate more, and this will be good for economic growth. But as I said, this was sort of the perception of the past. Then there was the realization that, in fact, the main engine of economic growth is not physical capital accumulation, it's human capital accumulation, education. And for education, in order to have proper education, you need to have a relatively equal distribution of income across the society. because it's not one individual. It's not Jeff Bezos that is investing in his own wealth alone. In order to generate proper education, it's not enough that one person will invest in herself. You need wide investment in society. And as a result of it, equality becomes more important for human capital formation. So the perception or the viewpoint that is more prevalent today is that during the period in which physical capital accumulation was the main engine of economic growth, inequality was correlated with economic prosperity because it propelled physical capital accumulation. But at the moment that education or human capital became the main engine of economic growth, in fact, equality started to be much more important. And as a result, because it permitted wider participation in the process of accumulation that is necessary for investment in education. So again, it depends very much in which stage of development you are, and it depends very much. So there is no general perception about the relationship between inequality and economic growth. It depends very much on the stage of development in which each country is. Those countries that are still in early stages of development in which physical capital formation is very important will see a positive correlation between inequality and growth. Those societies that moved into the stage in which education is the main engine of economic growth will see the opposite relationship.
That is super interesting. Education being the major factor there, because I come from a generation now that, or at least for me, it is true that I think I have learned more from the internet than from formal education. And the internet, I think, is a great equalizer in a way, as that not everybody, of course, but a lot of people have access to courses on YouTube, for example, from Harvard, introductory courses, or MIT. I mean, people can listen to this podcast, listen to you and your insights. And I wonder how that will change inequality in the future.